Thank you everyone for allowing me to be here today. I am not a music educator, but it makes me feel so good inside to be able to address this topic to you. Most of your students probably will never be professional musicians, right? But everything that you're teaching them in the music classroom will, number one, make them a good human being. I'm certain of that. But I also think will make them have the right skills for their career. You know, as mentioned, I'm an investor. I spent most of my career in financial services, and most recently in a field called venture capital. And in venture capital, what we do is we invest in startups, right? And for us in particular, we're focusing on things like artificial intelligence, robotics, digital currency, quantum computing, like far out there advanced data stuff that probably won't be affecting most of people's everyday lives for 10 or 20 years. And if I think about that girl, this is me now, but that's me too. As a 17-year-old drum major of my marching band in high school, I look at her. Number one, I think, oh, she's so cute. And you know, back then I definitely didn't feel cute at all. I'm like, oh, so she's so cute, but she also has no idea that she could ever be an investor. She knows nothing about banking, right? No idea about anything related to AI or robots. But I have been able to excel in this field, in large part because of my music education. There are certain critical skills that I learned in the classroom. This is not just about learning the right notes. This is not about theory or technique. We're talking about what you gain through performance, what you gain through sharing, what you gain through expression in a community together that really can help people throughout their career. You have the ability to empower your students beyond music, utilizing music for their professions. And I'm going to be focusing on 4 areas, which for me, I feel, have been most helpful, but I hopefully think it affects others as well. The powers that you have. It's the power of confidence, okay? The power of empathy, the power of imagination, and the power of identity. It's kind of like those 4 skill sets I find are things that through music education, you can really help cultivate in your student, and these are 4 keys to professional success. So starting first with the power of confidence. You know, when you're trying to build a career for yourself, everyone says, oh, you know, just gotta nail that interview, or you gotta raise your hand for that next assignment, you gotta ask for that promotion, you gotta ask for that salary increase. That's hard to do, right? That doesn't come naturally for most people. That really does take confidence to learn how to speak up, right? But also just generally, to be a leader in business, you have to inspire people to depend on you and to know that you've got it for them. I remember when I first moved, I moved around a lot growing up. My dad was in the government, and I moved to a new school once again in 9th grade. I didn't know many people, but I did learn how to play the bassoon in 8th grade in a different school. So that when I got to this new school, and I forgot what classroom assignment it was, but I drew a bassoon on something. And my classmate said, oh, you play the bassoon? We need a bassoon in our wind ensemble, because everyone needs a bassoon, which is pretty cool. And so like I auditioned for this wind ensemble, and I got in, and then as I was playing, some other really phenomenally talented kids in this wind ensemble said, oh, you play the bassoon? We need a bassoon in our youth symphony in Northern Virginia. Next thing I knew, I had auditioned for this youth symphony, and I got in. I was making friends along the way. I remember in early rehearsal, we were playing Beethoven's Egmont Overture, and there was a point, I'd only been playing the bassoon for like maybe a month or 2, okay? When, I don't know, the conductor said, okay, let's just take it from measure 297, whatever measure that was, and I played, and nobody else did, right? It was a low F. Just the second bassoon comes in. I think maybe the basses are playing, but I didn't hear them. I only knew at that moment it was just me. And the rest of the orchestra was depending on me to get that right. I cannot tell you what that did, right, for my confidence. That exposure, that moment where I realized, oh my gosh, they are all depending on me. I was scared, but that laid the kernel for so much more. So then after I was playing more and more, whether it was Carmina Burana, whether it was Chaik 6, whether all this stuff with very exposed bassoon lines, oh, I've got it. And that started to lead into other areas of my life as well. So then I would encourage you, as you think about helping to build confidence, as music educators, what can you do? I wasn't the best bassoonist in the world at that time, right? So for those that have students that may be shy or may not be playing that much, give it to them anyways. Let them solo. Create opportunities for trios, for quartets. Encourage maybe like a concerto night. Have them perform it in public. Throw them in the deep end. That's actually how I think you can really prepare yourself for life. I mean, I've got 2 kids. They're 6 and almost 8 years old. I know many parents are increasingly just wanting to shelter their kids. So it's almost more incumbent upon teachers to shake them up a little bit. I think one of the best things that you can do is actually create more opportunities for kids to have to stand up, perform, have their voices heard, and know that they're carrying something. As comfortable it might be in that moment, that it will actually be a great kernel for success in whatever the child chooses to do going forward. The power of empathy is another one. I've learned this much later in my career. I've been in banking now in venture now for over 20 years. And I realize now that one of the reasons I'm able to be successful is through that human connection with others. Yes, there's always the stereotypes of the big boss who bullies everyone around, but for the most part, I think the most successful bosses and the most successful business people in general are those that connect, right? You have to be able to lead a team. You have to be able to have people want to work with you or work for you. If you've got a pen you want to sell, someone has to really want to buy that pen from you. And that comes from having a connection with people, right? That I think is developed so beautifully through music. There's perhaps no other subject matter that teaches you how to connect wordlessly. And so to the extent that you're able, when you teach, not just to teach the music and the notes, but why? What is being said? Why are we saying this? I think, for example, if you ever put out let's say that you're going to introduce the kids to a piece by Leonard Bernstein. Have the kids actually study about Leonard Bernstein, right? Or another one, Shostakovich. I don't know how many people are teaching Shostakovich, but if you think about just a little bit of his biography, that lends so much more understanding to why he may have wanted to write the music that he did at that time. Right? So the children learn how to connect much more than just what they're playing, but why they're playing it, why it's there, why we are using notes to want to be able to communicate with each other. You know, I remember when I was a drum major, I went to drum major camp, and one of the leaders said, you know, if you're a good leader, people will admire you. If you're a great leader, people will admire themselves. And I think that really comes through empathy. Right, being able to connect with somebody. And I will also say this, there's a reason why I chose this picture of the band room. I know that a lot of time has passed since I was in high school, but teenagers are still teenagers, right? And I cannot tell you, this is where I'm gonna turn like Chris, how grateful I was for the sanctuary of that band room. Right, as difficult as especially the preteen and teen years can be, to know that the band room was a place of sanctuary and a safe space where I could be heard and understood. So to the extent that you are able to do this in your schools, always encourage the students to hang out with you or hang out with each other in the band room. Let that be the place where they can form those connections, right, to empathize and to understand with each other. You are blessed if you have something like this, a room where students can come together and perform music in a safe space. That really helps to engender empathy. The power of imagination. Do you like the robot band? On a separate topic, I'm really happy to talk about AI and music. But here, I would like to say this, very similar to this notion of the big boss ordering people around. You can think that there's a tendency for perhaps people in business to be stodgy, right? Oh, I've got to choose between art and getting an MBA, or I really wanted to be, a ballet dancer, but I ended up having to go to law school instead. I would argue that the most successful people in their careers actually have an amazing imagination. And if you even think about the businesses that probably transformed our lives, were led by very imaginative CEOs, whether it was Thomas Edison and everything that he invented, or Steve Jobs and what happened at Apple through his imagination. So, right now, And I think about my own career focusing on AI and technology, digital currencies, and creating robot bands and stuff like that. This really comes from having people understand that there's so much more out there than what they're being taught in any other classroom, right? Not to slam on like a history teacher or a geography teacher, but that stuff is kind of set. And there's so many other classes, I think, for students where it is what it is, versus in music where it can be so much more. And especially in this era where increasingly teaching to the test, and kids are just learning for a test, you almost have a more critical importance. You have to really augment what the children are missing in other classrooms, but you have that power through music for them to really be able to extend their imagination. So complete, again, thanks to Chris and his efforts with the York album project and others where you encourage children to write music, to compose, right? If you have the ability to, I would strongly suggest that you teach a little bit of music theory to your students, let them come up with songs on their own, perhaps have one person come up with the melody and have another student be able to complete it. Think about ways where you can really help hone their creativity and their imagination skills to consider something that's never existed before, and that they have the power to create that, right? The last thing for me here is around the power of identity. I love this picture of Condoleezza Rice, who was the Secretary of State under George Bush. She was also the National Security Advisor. She was the provost at Stanford. While she was Secretary of State, she wasn't provost at Stanford. When she was heading the NSA, she wasn't Secretary of State. But she was a musician during all those times. Right? She is a trained concert pianist. No matter what job she had, she was always a musician. You know, very similarly, not to equate myself with her accomplishments or achievements, but very similarly, I've had so many different jobs in my life, right? I began in venture capital. After the dot-com bubble burst, that went away, but I found myself at Goldman Sachs. After the global financial crisis and that job ended, I decided to start my own company. And then somehow I ended up in Chicago doing what I do now. But throughout all of that, I was a musician, and it saved me each time too. When I was at Goldman in New York, I used to actually moonlight at this Russian vodka bar in Midtown where I played the piano. So this is another thing about music. You start to explore other genres, right? I was a classically trained bassoonist, but now next I'm like this Russian lounge pianist. Goldman moved me out to Hong Kong. And wonderful thing about Hong Kong is if you're an American and you can sing a little bit, you're gold, because the Great American Songbook sounds a little bit weird in a Cantonese accent. But if you can sing, right, and you can express those words, next thing I knew, I was a jazz singer in Hong Kong. And what was really important there is during the global financial crisis, I remember it very well, it was a Thursday. And I got the call to go down to HR, and I knew exactly what it was about, because I wasn't making money for the firm. I was in this other area, this research institute, which I helped to launch, and we made no money. We were a cost center for the firm, and yet I had this cushy little expat package that was not going to survive, right, the crisis. And so I went down, all right, and I go back and I started to clean up my desk, and my colleagues were so upset and worried for me. And they're like, oh no, Rumi, are you going to be okay? I'm like, oh yeah, I've got a gig on Saturday. They're like, what? It's like, yeah, no, I'm playing these Christmas tunes at this mall in Hong Kong. You should come and see me. And they thought I was crazy, but one of them actually came, and then there I was at the shopping mall, singing these Christmassy jazz tunes. But funny enough, after I decided to leave, and when I went to Singapore and launched my own company, and this was funny. So I did that. Most of my friends back in the symphony days actually all became professional symphonic musicians. 2 of them are in the Singapore Symphony Orchestra. I moved to Singapore after Hong Kong, and all of a sudden I was a bassoonist again. I hadn't been for decades. And a friend who was a teacher at the Singapore American School said, oh, you're a bassoonist? I could really use a tutor for my bassoon students. And so I began teaching a little bit about bassoon again. So I mentioned all this because throughout all that, I mean, my goodness, those are all my jobs. I was a musician throughout, right? That is an amazing thing to be able to succeed in your career, to know who you are. Do you know how many people don't know that? And think about the skills that you gain through music, right? The ability, not the ability, you know if you're a musician that you can communicate. You know you're an effective communicator. You know you're an even more effective listener, right? You know that you're good at math. You know that you're good at art, right? You know that you have certain skills that can help you in any circumstance that you might be facing. So I guess my advice for you now as music educators, one thing to always teach your students is to let them know that they are musicians. They can go on to be lawyers or doctors or bankers or whatever, but they will always be a musician. And that'll be the core, I think, of a lot of strength for them going forward. And even in a random situation like mine, or you might find yourself out of a job, but you can lean on music, not necessarily for the money, but for the happiness and the comfort and security that it's always given you. Even that, I think, is power and good enough, right? So with that, I will just say thank you. Obviously, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions at all. And I will again say, I'm not a music educator. Everything has been my opinion. I have no idea if these skills will work or not. But I appreciate your time, and thank you for listening.